Back to our chat with Stefan Molyneux. And again, Steph, thanks for joining us. So we look at the other ways that the Constitution of the United States is being undermined. The free speech is enshrined right there at the beginning, the very first part of the Constitution. Can't miss it. In fact, in many ways, it is the right through which all the other rights are maintained and expressed and defended. The other big problem in America today, another issue for which I think Donald Trump was elected, a lot of people, even moderate Democrats, I think, recognize the crisis on our border. And we know that the founding documents give very few real powers to the federal government. But one of them is the need to enforce our borders and our national sovereignty. Why do so many in America, even the so-called Rhino Republicans, why are they so lax about border enforcement?
There are unfortunately a large number of factors that are congregating together to make the open borders issue so powerful in America. So just to run through them very, very briefly, the first, of course, is that endless waves of low-skilled immigrants drive down the wages of American workers, which the Chamber of Commerce likes, of course. People who hire maids and gardeners like the fact that those wages are kept low. So that's one factor. Another factor, of course, is that immigrants, particularly from third world countries, overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. They overwhelmingly vote for the left, and so the left wants to bring them in because they can't win the argument based on economics or morals or history or efficiency, so they can basically, if you can't convince the American voters, just replace them. And the third factor with regards to immigration is that there's a very, very strong incentive for other countries to send people to the West, and in particular to America. So, of course, think of Mexico. If Mexico has a bunch of people it doesn't find particularly productive, and there was, in fact, Mexican government-sponsored pamphlets years ago on how to cross the border, how to get your rights, how to make sure you stay. If they get people across the border into America, legally or illegally, those people will get a hold of jobs, they'll get a hold of welfare, they'll get a hold of American taxpayer or customer resources, and then they fire that money back across the border. This is money that's going back to Somalia, it's going back to North Africa, it's going back to Mexico, it's going back to Guatemala. And so those countries love sending people into America where they can then pillage, in many ways, the American taxpayer, send the money back overseas. And that's really great because the other countries, the foreign countries, get a huge amount of money coming in from people they don't have to provide any services for because those services are being provided for by the American taxpayer. So in Mexico, remittances, which is the money coming, of course, from people in Mexico, like 25% of the whole population of Mexico now lives in America, sends money back. Remittances are huge in the American economy. They're even bigger than the price of oil exports.
Yeah, and I remember a few years ago, the American government itself, the Department of Agriculture, was actually taking out ads in Mexican newspapers telling Mexican citizens how many food stamp benefits we had and encouraging them to come and take them. And that's my second question. What hope do we have when you've got the Koch brothers on one side and George Soros on the other, both teaming up to promote open borders, and on top of that, besides the Kochs and the Soros, the two extreme different wings, you've got almost the entire Libertarian Party arguing that we shouldn't have borders globally. With all of that, that unholy alliance of what used to be known as the far right and the far left, where do we go, average citizens, to insist on the constitutional right to defend our borders?
Well, I mean, history is pretty clear that when governments refuse to control borders, it ends up in civil war. And that is, of course, the great fear of this. And this is not just a fear within America, it's a fear in many of the Western countries where the open borders situation is provoking huge amounts of conflict. There's such a massive disconnect between the average person in the West. The significant majority of people in the West want significant reductions or even an outright pause in immigration, which of course sounds outlandish, but that was the case for America from the 1920s until the 1960s, that there was very little immigration. So the masses of people are desperately alarmed at huge amounts of immigration. I mean, when you get tens of thousands of people from Somalia dumped into Minnesota, then you get Ilhan Omar, right? They're voting for her because she's Muslim, because she's from Somalia. That's the deal. That's the way it goes. And this kind of fragmentation of the body politic is of great concern to people. Multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural societies historically do not have a good track record at all. So the general population is saying, let's take a pause on this and let's see, at some point you're supposed to stop eating and start digesting, so to speak. Let's see how this is going to work out. But there are so many powerful pressures trying to keep those borders open that it is quite hard. And so one of two things is going to happen. Either there's going to be local enforcement or trying to drive people back through guerrilla groups, which I don't like, but you know, this is kind of what happens in history, Or the second is, of course, mass immigration being so expensive to the public purse is simply going to crash the dollar. It's going to crash the economy, and then people don't want to come because there's a smoking wreckage where the American free market used to be.
Yeah, academics in particular and intellectuals have so demonized the idea of the melting pot. Come to America because you become American. You learn the language, you participate in the legal running of the country, you contribute. That's been replaced by, you said, multiculturalism, which is everybody comes here. They're all better than Westerners because Westerners are a bunch of racist. The minute you get here, you have a moral obligation not to learn the language, to carve out in American cities in Michigan places where there are only Muslims, for instance, and we have no interaction. Assimilation is now considered bigotry. And I mentioned already the Libertarian Party, which believes that global borders should be removed. So that puts us in a position now where in trying to argue this as rational people, the language is so shifted here. Can you explain a little bit what pluralism really means versus this weird multiculturalism we've adopted from progressives?
Well, so there was, of course, the idea that you come to America or you come to Canada or to the West because you value freedom, because you value the free market, you value freedom of speech, you value separation of church and state, you value the foundational freedoms that the West has to offer. You come here for freedom. Wonderful. I think that's great. But that, of course, has changed since the institution of the welfare state. And not just the welfare state, it's a whole bunch of income transfer programs. Trillions of dollars get shifted around at gunpoint by the government. So the fundamental question now is, are people coming to the West for freedom, or are they coming to the West for free stuff? Because those two are kind of antithetical to each other. If you want freedom, that means you want free opportunity and you want to earn your own way. If you want free stuff, it means that the government has to get it by force from other people and give it to you, which is the antithesis of private property, the free market, and the basic liberties that the West was founded on. So it's one thing to say, it's the boomer meme, well, there's great ethnic restaurants and so on. Well, that's wonderful. But the problem is, of course, when you have the welfare state, there is the fundamental driver to integrate is not there. The fundamental drive to integrate is, I need to participate in an economy that speaks English, that respects property rights, that respects contracts and the rule of law, that is Christian in its nature, in fundamental ways. So if you have the welfare state, you're shielded from having to get integrated into an economy. If I move to Japan, like say I win $1 million and I move to Japan, well, I can just live on that $1 million. I don't have to learn Japanese. But if I sort of take Charles Murray's advice to his kids, just go to a foreign country with $500 in your pocket, but you better start learning the local culture and customs because you got to economically survive there, which you can't do unless there's some kind of integration. So the welfare state has not only attracted, I think, people who want free stuff rather than freedoms, but it has also shielded them from any requirement to integrate into the general economy and culture of the host country.
Let me ask you before, we've got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure I get your take on this. Looking at the lay of the land now, the media is trying to convince us that the election's pretty much over, that every sentient Democrat's going to outpoll Donald Trump already. What do you think the perspective that Donald Trump gets elected? Are there enough people, the silent majority, like you said, who want border control, who want a sane immigration policy, who want the protection of speech and rights? Are there enough silent voices here to get him reelected again, or are you worried about the coming election in 2020?
Well, it's funny, because back in 2015, 2016, I did put out thoughts that I thought Donald Trump was going to win, but I was always concerned about doing that too much because then people are like, oh, it's in the bag, we don't have to come out, we don't have to do anything. But, just between us, no, this isn't going out anywhere else, I'm sure. But just between us, I do think that what's happening right now in America is the Democrats are scaring the living crap out of everyone. I mean, I've been watching those debates, I'm sure you have as well. It's a madhouse. Like, there literally are, I think, a lot of mentally ill people in that party. And, you've seen the sort of socialists of America where it's like, you can't clap, you can only make hissing sounds and make sure your pronouns are correct. I mean, this really is a kind of hysteria. And I think the people are looking at the Democrats saying, something wicked this way comes, something kind of alien has emerged in our midst. So I think there is going to be a run to Trump. The real question is, can Trump maintain the economic coasting that has been going on? Can he continue to preside over job growth and job creation? There could be arguments that say that the Fed is going to want to crash the economy, that the left is going to want to crash the economy before the election. I think if he can hold on to economic gains, I think that he will get one more kick at the can. But if he doesn't do anything to control immigration, Donald Trump will be, without a doubt, the last, certainly majorly Republican president because the demographics are simply overwhelming after Trump. So if he doesn't spend his last 4 years dealing with immigration and dealing with illegal immigration in particular, it's all over for the Republican Party.